in the second part of today's workshop, we have the 4 presentations will be delivered by myself and Dr. Kawasaki from Japan, Professor Adolf Wu from Zhuhai in China. And the last one from will be delivered by Mr. Raymond Wong. Because the shared time has to be delayed by about 20 minutes. So first I would like to ask whether or not Dr. Kawasaki would like to present first. So if you present first, I will present the last, okay?
Okay, so I will start the presentation. So let me share the screen.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So can you see my screen?
Sure, yes.
Okay, so thank you very much. So I will start my presentation. So good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Kawasaki from the University of Tokyo. So now Tokyo is around 6:30 in the evening. So okay, so nice to meet you. So today's presentation is kind of the preliminary report for the relationship between the e-commerce and the COVID-19 outbreak in Japan. So okay, so as you may know, in Japan, the first infection case was identified in January 2020. Then after that, so we experienced a rapid outbreaks 4 times like this. So like this. So so in the first outbreak, the state of the emergency was declared for about 2 months, like this. So during this declaration, the telework and also the online class and also refraining from the going out trip were strongly requested by the government without any legal forces. So actually, this is a bit kind of the different point from the other countries. We have no legal penalty for the going out trip. Then during this period, so approximately 85% decrease in the people near the Tokyo station was observed in April or May, compared with last year. So the drastically decreased in the trip. Then the second and third and fourth outbreaks, like this here, actually more serious in terms of the number of infection cases. So in fact, the second state of the emergency had just lifted in Japan just a week ago. So we took a panel survey in the 3 different time points regarding the infection towards the use of the e-commerce, the before corona here, and after the corona 2 times, like this. So here is our research question in this study. So people started to use the e-commerce due to the COVID-19 outbreak or not? Then who and why and where? This is our research question. So as mentioned, the questionnaire survey was conducted to collect the data on the Japanese consumers' chronological changes in the e-commerce usage, especially for the B2C online shopping. So we focus on the B2C online shopping, but C2C and also the online flea market and also food delivery service like Uber are excluded in our study. Okay, so this figure shows the share of the stay-at-home duration and frequency for the shopping in each time period. So here we can understand that more than 800 people, the share is around more than 30%, spend more than 80% at the home in a week, on just after the outbreak, the COVID-19 outbreak, which is a T2. We mentioned T2. The stay at the home duration at the T2 was longer than that in the T1. So after that, the time duration at the home became shorter in the T3. So these changes are expected results because the state of the emergency had already been lifted at that time. So, however, one of the interesting observations for this figure is the stay-at-home duration in T3 is still longer than that in the T1. So this means that the respondent's lifestyle in terms of the refraining from the going out did not perfectly revert to the pre-COVID-19 level. So the right figure, so this one shows the share of the frequency of the going out for the shopping in each period, T1, T2, T3. So the shopping frequency in T2 was significantly lower comparing to that in the T1. So in T3, the shopping frequency increased from the T2, but it is still lower than the pre-COVID-19 level, which is T1. So we actually further checked the relationship between these figures. Among the people who reduced their shopping frequency in T2 also increased their stay-at-home time in T2. So this means the shopping frequency at the retail stores, physical retail stores, might have negative correlation with the stay-at-home duration. Okay. So if the people stay at home longer, probably they have a more opportunity to use the e-commerce. So this figure shows the change in the percentage of the time spent at home by the prefectures, each prefectures in Japan. So red zone indicate the time duration at home increase, while the blue zone here, blue zone indicates a decrease. The percentage of the time spent at home increased from the T1 to T2 in the most of the prefectures, especially for the large number of infected prefectures, such as Kanto area. Kanto area includes the Tokyo and Yokohama city, and also the Kansai region. Kansai is Osaka and Kyoto, these kind of cities. And Fukuoka. Fukuoka is here. These are very big cities. So as I mentioned, the longer time duration at home, the more chance to use the e-commerce. So therefore, highly populated area like the Kanto or Kansai area probably are likely to use the e-commerce than other areas. So this figure shows the usage of the e-commerce and the retail stores by each type of the goods. So this figure shows from this figure, the share of the e-commerce usage is different across the type of the goods. The high share of the e-commerce usage can be observed for the book, DVD software, and machinery and PC applicants. However, the grocery goods grocery goods and the beverage and alcohol are a small share of the EC usage. This is probably because we want to buy the food or drinking in the physical stores because we want to see that. Okay. Then we show the change in the share of the e-commerce usage for each good between the time period. The use of the e-commerce increases approximately twice from the T1 to T2. Here, this blue bar, T1 to T2. Then from T2 to T3, these just slightly decrease. The EC usage is a decrease from the T2 to T3. So as for grocery goods, it increased approximately 1.5 times compared to before COVID-19. So on the contrary, the machinery and PC applicants and book and DVD software only increased by approximately 35% from the T1 to T2. So the EC usage is different from the type of the goods. So actually, in the questionnaire survey, we include the one question about the EC is essential for you or not. Then the respondents answer the 5-point Likert scale, the strongly agree to strongly disagree. So from this figure, the importance of the e-commerce is increased from the T1 to T1 to T2. So however, that are not significantly declined from the T2 to T3, not change actually, after the statistical test. Okay. So to observe the detailed change in the individual psychological attitude, so we trace the individuals over the 3 time points because we have a panel data like this. So this table is the groups from the T1 to T2. So the vertical one is the time T1. The EC is essential for you and strongly agree, neither disagree and strongly disagree. Then the horizontal one is the time period 2, T2. So the same question, the strongly agree, neither disagree, strongly disagree. So this sample was divided into 4 groups, group 1, 2, 3, 4. So group 1 recognized the importance of the e-commerce, both the before and after the COVID-19. Then in group 2, the psychological intention towards the use of the e-commerce became positive after the COVID-19 outbreak. So in the group 3, so actually this is a very small group, the importance of the e-commerce became the negative in T2. In T1, that was a positive. So in the group 4, the group 4 is a negative attitude towards the e-commerce usage from the original, T1, and also T2, still negative. Then below figure is the share of, sorry, the below figure is the share of the positive answers for the usefulness or reasons for using the e-commerce for group 1 to group 4 for the T1 and T2. So from this figure, first of all, in overall, in T1, the blue bar, the higher positive answer rate observed in order from the group 1, 3, 2, and 4. So on the other hand, at the T2, which is orange bar, the order is 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is the expected result because in the T2, so importance of the e-commerce in the group 2 is higher than that of the group 3. So in addition, the higher rate for the COVID-19 are observed for the group 2 rather than group 1. So this implies probably the recognition of the usefulness of the e-commerce in group 2 is due to the COVID-19 related reasons. Then actually we further divided the group 2 into the 2 groups, like not only group 2, but we focus on the group 2. They divided into the group 2-1 and group 2-2 using the time period number 3. But actually, I skipped this slide because of the time limitation. Okay. Then after that, we conduct a simple SEM analysis, structural equation modeling. So in the structural equation modeling, so there is the model for the technology acceptance model. So we use the model because we can replace the technology as e-commerce. Then we try to understand the relationship between the variables. Then we identify. Then we okay. So we identify the psychological structure of the respondent. Okay, so this is observed variables. Then we identify the 3 different models. So for each time period, T1, T2, and T3, Then I don't mention the detail, but statistical values are acceptable enough, especially for the AGFY or something. Okay. Then so using the model, we try to calculate the total effect of the latent variables. Actually, for the latent variable, we could identify the perceived ease of the use, the also perceived usefulness of the e-commerce, and intention to use, then subjective norms, then trust in the technology. So this is for the latent variable for T1. Then for T2 and T3, and what is the difference from the T1 is inclusion of the COVID-19 related variables. So this is one of the latent variables for the T2 and T3. Then we can finally calculate the total effect of the latent variables. Okay, then this is the total effect of the latent variables on the intention to use for these figures. Then in terms of the total effect of the T1 here, the largest effect was the perceived usefulness here, followed by perceived ease of the use, subjective norm, trust in technology. And of course, the COVID-19 is not calculated because the T1, this is before COVID-19. Then for the right figure, so total effect for the T2 and T3 are similar to the T1, almost similar, but the total effect of the COVID-19 is included in the T2 and T3, and which is also larger than that of the subjective norms and also the trust in technology. Also, the total effect of the COVID-19 at T2 was larger than T3 here. So this implies probably the less going out trips in September 2020, the T3, than in the April and also May. So in other words, so people start to use the e-commerce after the COVID-19 because they would like to avoid the infections or just following the government policy. So then probably after that, they recognize the usefulness of the EC and continues to use it. Actually, the COVID-19 has a larger mediate effect to use for the intention to use via perceived usefulness. So again, so they use e-commerce after the COVID-19, then they recognize the usefulness, then they continue to use. This is our analysis. Okay, so this is a summary. So maybe I can skip it. Okay, so thank you very much for your time and attention.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
May I ask a question?
Yes, please.
First, really very interesting presentation and also very interesting results. So I think now in Japan, we are all talking about whether we should go ahead with the Olympics, what are the pros and cons. So in your opinion, like based on your research and your results, do you have any insights or indication on what should be the way forward if the Tokyo Olympics is going ahead, and are there anything that they should specifically do?
Thank you very much for your very good and interesting question. Actually, from our analysis, it's not so easy to suggest something for the Olympic Games, but actually, now in Tokyo, the citizens in Tokyo, the more than 60% of the people oppose to have Olympic Games. Then, but probably so they will open their Olympic Games. But it's difficult to say something. But yeah, maybe okay. So and also in the, how can I say, in the village of the athlete. So they originally, so Japanese government tried to provide the alcohol. Actually, the one of the most, how can I say, maybe in the restaurant with alcohol is the most problematic for the infection. Then they will ban or the providing the alcohol. So maybe we can manage this game, but okay. I'm sorry, maybe not so easy to mention something. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Wong, would you like to raise your question, please? Yeah, Dr. Wong. I have seen your questions. Your question is about, say, Dr. Kawasaki, and Dr. Wong has a question. His question is, the e-commerce has been around for a few years, right? So efforts have been made to establish shipbroken platforms that, well, yes. He would like to know the pandemic, whether or not the pandemic actually increases the e-commerce.
Yeah.
If you know that, in what fields?
Yeah, actually, in the actual data show that indicates that the e-commerce is increasing. E-commerce usage is increasing in Japan, especially for the goods for the kind of especially for the machinery and also the PC applicants and also book, DVD, and software. So these goods are especially increase in the EC usage. But actually, for the grocery goods is not so increasing for the EC. So probably this pandemic increased the e-commerce usage even after the convergence of the COVID-19, in my opinion.
Okay, because of the time, we have to question. We may ask each other after online meeting. So we have to move on to the next presentation. I will have a meeting at 6:30. So I have to leave before that. I may not be able to deliver my presentation. So I would like to ask chair, the conference chair, Professor Adolf Wu to rearrange my presentation for tomorrow or day after tomorrow. So also I would like to remind the following two presenters to keep their time, okay? So next presentation will be delivered by our host, Professor Adolf Wu. I don't think I need to introduce him to you guys. So Professor Wu, would you like to start your presentation, please?
Sure, Professor Ge. First, can you see my screen?
Sure, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. And so I think Professor Ge has already given me a little bit of pressure for me to keep my time. And I clearly, for me as the conference host, if I don't keep my time, I will be in trouble, right? So, okay, so again, once again, thank you very much, Professor Ge, and hello, everyone, again, and thank you very much for joining this conference. So my presentation today is called Institutional Erosion in Environmental Governance of Maritime Transport. I must say that this is actually a paper that it was not done by me alone. It was actually done by with my colleague Jason Monias, who is also one of the co-organizers of this conference. And so in this actually in the chat box, I have just sent everybody the PDF copy of this paper that Jason and I have written and is already published in Journal of Transport Geography. So if you want to really know more about the details of the research work that we have done, please feel free to read that paper. And I think in here, what I would like to do is that I think the main issue is that Jason and I, and of course, indeed, also some colleagues and myself, have done quite a bit of work on that is related to climate change impacts on transport and logistics, especially climate change adaptation of transport and logistics infrastructures. And so from our perspective, what we found is that there are actually a lot of issues that are related when we are talking about adapting to climate change impact or even mitigating to climate change, like greenhouse gas emissions, CO2 control, etc. Actually, a lot of things was really about regulations. A lot of things are also about the management side of things. And we found that institutions played a very big role on it. And in fact, when we are talking about institutions, I think many of you might have heard about the so-called deinstitutionalization or institutional theories, of which is how institutions would actually affect, or let's say, to play a role in facilitating or act as a barrier in slowing down changes or the things that we are going to solve. So, like in this case, environmental governance of maritime transport. But in this paper, what Jason and we are trying to do is we try to introduce a new concept, which is called institutional erosion, because in the reality, we found that there are a lot of efforts and a lot of work that are trying to improve the environmental aspect of maritime transport and indeed transportation. We found that is that it doesn't lead to it leads to some institutional changes. So there, the institution was actually trying to adapt to the new challenge. But at the same time, the change is actually becoming very, very slow. And in fact, it's also very slow to an extent that sometimes it may even move backward. And at the same time, that a lot of the arguments that we saw in the literature was that it also led that there were actually a lot of the so-called deinstitutionalization, that these actions may lead to a collapse of the institutional system or the existing institutions so that there will be substantial changes. But what we found is that in many cases, that the reality is we always move somewhere in between. And so in this case, what it means by moving somewhere in between, that is the concept that we call the so-called institutional erosion. So in here, you can see the main contents of this presentation that we would like to share is a little bit of the background, some of the illustrated cases that we have worked on, and finally, the conclusions. And so in terms of the background, I think what we try to do is that it's really about what exactly is institutional erosion. And I think for us, we try to argue is institutional erosion can be identified as a case if neither institutional renewal nor collapse have been evidenced. So in this case, what would happen is that facing new challenges, for example, when a port is trying to implement new policies to try to actually make the port more resilient to the impacts on climate change and try to adapt to climate change impact, what we will find is that the port as an institution, it is trying to maintain the deinstitutionalization stage over a long period of time, but at the same time, not completely demolishing it. And in fact, when we found that there is some kind of institutional erosion, what it actually means is that in many cases is that the institution, it remains pretty much intact. They try to change, but then they are not actually changing, and in some way they are even eroding and become less effective in dealing with these new challenges. And so what the effort that they are trying to do is that they actually become deadlocked and actually come across a bottleneck that usually what you would see is that a lot of the plans have been designed, a lot of the plans have been approved, but then they will experience a lot of bottleneck when they try to come to the implementation stage because of institutional erosion. And so in this case, in our paper, what we try to do is that we are trying to look at the various type of market-based measures, we call it the MBM, submitted to the International Maritime Organization since 2010. So as you can see on the left column, these are the proposals and then for different type of market-based measures. And what they were trying to do is that they actually submitted to the IMO, which is certainly, of course, the main organization or institution for maritime governance. And if you can look at their descriptions and look at the type on the middle column and the right column, is that what they are trying to do is they try to improve maritime governance. So for example, for the second one, like the leverage incentive scheme, is what they are trying to do is to have a greenhouse gas fund contributions collected on marine bunker. And then when you look at the vessel efficient system, VES, what they try to do is that they were trying, the World Shipping Council was trying to establish mandatory efficient standard for new and existing ships, and each vessel will be judged against a requirement to improve its efficiency by a certain % below the average efficiency for specific vessels, class, and sizes. So in this case, what the submitter was trying to do is that the submitter was trying to make use of the International Maritime Organization to try to actually improve their operations, to try to improve the maritime governance so as to actually to make the sector more economically efficient, but at the same time also more environmentally efficient. So in fact, if you read our paper, you can actually see that there has been a lot of analysis and discussions about the process on how they try to develop the plan, how they try to make use of the plan to try to push through their agenda on improving environmental governance. But the next one that I would like to share with you is that basically, based on all these schemes, we try to develop the, let's say, when we look at the process of trying to do how they develop the scheme, how they submit it to IMO, and how they try to push through and try to implement the scheme, what we found is that we found actually a lot of common points between them. And in this table are the evidence for the key institutionalization pressure identified in maritime transport governance. So we try to make it, we have 3 types of pressure that are acting as some kind of obstacle to slow down or even stop these plans from implementing altogether, which are including the political pressure, the functional pressure, and also the social pressure. But at the same time too, it also have 2 levels of analysis. One is the organizational level and analysis. The other one is the environmental. I want to say in here, the environmental is not environmental protection, that type of environmental. It's more about the overall environment, the circumstances on whether these type of efforts will actually be able to get through the different type of pressure politically, socially, and functionally, and actually try to improve environmental governance. And so in this case, what we see is that in here is based on these cases, what we found is earlier, we already say in the maritime transportation, there are actually some so-called earlier institutions that include, for example, and you see those on the left is within the organizational field, you have IMO, EU, countries and cities, and also you have the industrial groups, etc. And of course, in terms of the more interest groups, you have the IPCC, environmental groups, etc. So later, as things has been developed, that it actually becomes some kind of an organizational field that even the interest groups, the citizens, they were integrated into the organization or integrated into the institutional system, which actually saying that, look, whenever what we are going to do, there will be some kind of a consensus discussions that is trying to build between the international organizations, between the other stakeholders, as well as the interest groups. And so now when we find that, and we go into the institutionalization processes, usually there will be some kind of a new challenges that are coming up, like you said, that are climate change, of which there are pressure to transport and logistics to become more resilient. And I would say, of course, I think as what we also heard already in this conference is that the challenges from COVID-19 and the pandemic that are also playing an impact on transport and on transportation, as including maritime transportation. And it also put pressure on the maritime transport, for example, like ports, that they actually need to develop something, to do something which is to do something to become more resilient, of which it is an opportunity to actually to deinstitutionalize the existing institution. But what happened is that what we see, at least from the efforts that have been done in the past 10 years that are on the plans that are submitted to IMO, what we found is that there were actually three directions that would be going. Is that number one is the so-called institutional renewal, that IMO regains legitimacy and take global action. And then on the bottom is simply that all these actions have actually led to the collapse of the institution. For example, so like other actors coordinate without the IMO and take global actions. And what we found is that, in fact, what happened in most of these cases is that it actually takes the type of middle way, of which the current situation continues, that IMO, they are still expecting IMO to take the lead, and then they still tie different, the institution system remains pretty much intact, but the problem is that it remains intact, but then the problem is no actions were finally taken. A lot of very nice plans, but then very, very little action was actually implemented in improving environmental governance. And in fact, what happened is that, in fact, there were actually, but then this process of non-action actually lead to some kind of an institutional change, of which the stakeholders within the institutional system, they actually try to adjust to these new challenges and recognizing that all these are the new problems. They adjusted, but together, what happened is that they actually failed to take a collective action to make real changes to the issue itself. So what we are trying to say is that in this case, in terms of maritime governance, in terms of environmental governance, what we found is that, so it actually, this process of non-action, but at the same time, it actually made the institutional system even worse, or actually eroded the institution, and actually make the stakeholders trying to change something, but not changing to the better, but actually changing to something which is worse, and actually making decision-making and governance more complicated and also more ineffective. And so this is an ongoing theoretical discussion about how we should improve this. And in fact, this is an ongoing project that we are working on that. And so hopefully this will provide the audience some insights about the potential problem of institutions on environmental governance in transportation. And so before I end, I would just like to give some acknowledgement to some of the funders for this project, which include the Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada, the Beijing Normal University, Hong Kong Baptist University, United International College, and of course, CCAPPTIA that are providing some in-kind support too. So I think that's all for my presentation, and thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much. And any questions or comments, please? If no comments or questions, we may move on to the next one. And any questions?
I think I see some comments on the chat box. May I just very quickly respond to this?
Okay.
I think from Dr. Wong, how is it related to the first exploration of the Northwest Passage and the new Northwest Passage postulated for maritime transport about Siberia, and how much is this geopolitical economy? I would say, put it very simple, is that exploration is one thing, but then at the same time too exploration is one thing, but at the same time it also involves what exactly is the economic implications, and also to what extent when this passage is being opened, how would it actually affect the governance and the decision-making system of maritime transportation as a whole. So for example, because of the Northwest Passage and the Northern Sea Route, there is already various type of proposed regulations and also guidelines on actually how to on ships that are passing through the Northwest Passage and the Northern and the Arctic routes, what should be done. And I think that certainly there will be some kind of institutional impact. And also I can see that there are you referring to the development of port and routes within a single jurisdiction as in the plans to IMO, but as an international institution or rather NGO more or less, how would interests be balanced? Is the question then one of the national interest versus international environmental protection? I would say certainly that that is certainly one of the factors, because of course maritime transport, there's always an issue that is related to national and international. But I think is a little bit more than that, because what would happen is that especially when we are talking about climate adaptation, I think when we are like adapting to climate change impact, like ports, especially like for ports and infrastructure, they are located within a particular geographical region. So impacts for climate change, for example, are very much a local problem. But then at the moment, what happened too is that for IMO as an international organization, and I will also include, for example, United Nations, what they usually would try to do is that they try to propose the so-called international best practices into solving a very local problem. So what they do like to do a lot is that, okay, this is a local problem. This is the way on it seems that it will work. And so how are we going to do it so that we can actually make use of this case and try to say that this is the international best practice so that it could be one size fits all in every part of the world. And this is certainly something, of course, they have their interest. They also have their way or the approach on how to justify their existence. But I would certainly say that this is actually certainly one aspect of the problem, although not all the aspect of this problem. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, because of the time, we have to move on to the next one. Okay. Next presentation will be delivered by Mr. Raymond Wong. Are you ready, Mr. Wong? Okay, you switch on your microphone, please.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, you hear me?
Okay, hello? Yes. Okay, great.
Good.
Yes, okay. You may share your screen now.
Yep, thank you.
So Mr. Wong is the first Chinese fellow of the British Association of Average Adjusters. He is a regular lecturer or speaker on general average and maritime claims related topics. Okay, Raymond, please now.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your attendance. Actually, the pandemic has been ongoing for over a year now, and yet there's no comforting sign of it being over in the near future. However, I always say that there's always something good out of something bad. And you may appreciate that the ship owners have been doing unexpectedly well during in the midst of the COVID-19. Nevertheless, I feel very, very sorry to see many seafarers being stranded on board the vessel and painfully kept away from their family for months. You know, last Friday, 25th June, was the International Day of Seafarer. And I take the opportunity to thank the seafarers for their contributions and praying for and looking forward to a fair future for seafarers who deserve our gratitude, respect, and support. So now, back to our talk today about the insurance. The marine insurance is considerable importance to sea transport, as we all appreciate. Insurance is a contract of risk, and the contract of marine insurance, as defined in the Section 1 of the UK Marine Insurance Act 1906, is a contract whereby the insurer undertakes to indemnify the assured in manner and to the extent thereby agreed against marine losses. That is to say, the losses incident to marine adventure. And fairly often we hear people say that marine insurance contract of indemnity, yet it is not a perfect indemnity because the indemnity is actually set in a manner and to the extent thereby agreed. And the contract embodied by a marine policy. And the marine policy form used, we call it MAR form. And the subject matter insured we are talking about today is ship, which include the hull, machinery, etc. And the standard clauses, insurance clauses commonly used in conjunction with the policy of insurance are the Institute Time clauses, Hull 11083. So some 40 years old. Actually, the clauses have been revised, but not so popular, and people still being conservative, still use this ITC House 11083. And this is the English policy wording. And I think most people, not so many these days, but still most people would prefer the English policy wording, largely because they have a support of the legal regime, which are well tried and well understood. They have the Marine Insurance Act, I just mentioned, 1906, supported by more than 300 years of case law. And what's more, on the claim-wise, they have this sort of a rule of practice of the Association of Average Adjuster. The average adjuster are a small profession who adjust averages, i.e. the marine damages. And this ITC, you'll find it a small, few small words specifying that this insurance is subject to English law and practice. And under this ITC, you'll find the risk cover, saying that the insurance covers loss or damage to the subject matter insured caused by peril named under Clause 6 and Clause 7, which include, among various, commonly you commonly come across as a peril of the sea, for example, collision, grounding, heavy weather, and it's also cover fire, explosion, negligence of the master officer's crew or pilots, also negligence of repairers or charterers, provided that they are not yet ashore, etc. And under the ITC, the various claims, types of claims, include, the largest category, the loss and damage, physical loss, physical damage to the subject matter insured, i.e. the ship. And then we have two types of losses. One is total loss, which explained by its name, and partial loss. And the partial loss is a partial damage to the subject matter insured, to the ship. In addition to this physical loss, we have the liability. The policy also covers liability, but only the collision liability, only 3/4 of the collision liability. Also, the policy covers some expenses, general average, salvage, sure and labor, etc. But unfortunately, we don't have the time to explain, each category. And the heading of claims, or the claims which are affected by the COVID-19, actually are the particular law, the partial loss, which include particular average and general average. What do you mean by particular average? Particular average actually is a partial loss of the subject matter insured caused by peril insured against, accidental in nature, and also the loss lies where it falls, i.e. you have a damage to the ship caused by peril insured against, then the claim will fall on the underwriters, the insurer. And the indemnity is where you have this damage and the damage is repaired, the underwriters will be responsible for the reasonable cost of repairs. And the general average, we have a general average sacrifice, we have general average expenditure, we have also general average contribution. But here, all of them, I mean, actually, general average refers to extraordinary sacrifice or expenditure intentionally and reasonably made or incur for the common safety or the common interest of the parties concerned in the common maritime adventure. For example, if a vessel went aground, grounded, this is an accident. The damage caused to by grounding would be particular average and fall on the underwriters on the ship. However, in effort to refloat the vessel, you call in the salvage tax, like the Ever Given recent case, then the expenses incurred is to refloat the vessel, which is for the common safety of both the ship and the cargo and other property on board. We'll call that general average. And we, this evening, particular focus on the GA expenditure, and the underwriter's liability, how underwriter's liability would be the ship's proportion, because these expenses will be shared by ship and cargo and other parties like container, etc. And insurance on ship will be responsible for the ship proportion attaching to the ship. So what is reasonable? We are talking about reasonable cost of repairs. What is reasonable is a question of fact according to the Marine Insurance Act. But I must stress that the policy, according to law, the Marine Insurance Act 55, stating that unless the policy otherwise provides, the insurer on ship or goods is not liable for any loss possibly caused by delay. Although the delay be caused by a peril insured against. Bear in mind these two issues, what is reasonable and also the policy exclude delay. And about the reasonable cost of repairs, there are some tests, submitted or we can apply it from the case law. One of them is a leading one, Lord Justice Donaldson. He referred to the case North Atlantic, stating that the cost of repairing refers to that of restoring the vessel to her pre-damage condition. And in Irvine, the judge said that the court has to arrive as near as possible at the actual figure which would have been expended had she been repaired. And the Medina Princess, Roskill Justice, using the approach saying that the reasonable cost of repairs was to identify what would have to be expanded to put the ship right. The ship got damaged, you have to repair her, and what would be the expenses incurred in good faith to repair her, put her back, restore her to the pre-damage condition. That's for the particular average. And for the general average is adjusted usually in accordance with what we call the York-Emmett rules, which are the international accepted code of rules, setting out what losses and expenses are admissible in general average. York-Emmett rules, it is not a convention, have no legal status unless it is incorporated in the carriage of, in the contract of carriage. You often find bill of lading counterparties stating that general average to be adjusted according to York-Emmett rules 1994 or 2016, etc. Under the York-Emmett rules, there's a rule called Rule Paramount, stating that in no case shall there be any allowance for a sacrifice or expenditure unless reasonably made or incurred. That's reasonable. Again, you gotta be reasonably incurred. And also there's a rule, letter rule C, excluding loss or damage sustained or expenses incurred by reason of delays. So the particular average adjusted in terms of the condition of the policy, and the general average to be adjusted according to York-Emmett rules. Both of them, have the element of the reasonableness and also excluding loss by delay. But then we are now talking about the pandemic delay related expenses. And the COVID-19 restriction have been affecting the ports and repair facilities. And the causing ongoing disruption on port operations around the world. Varying restrictions have been imposed by the ports. 14 days subsequently increased to 21 days. Quarantine, isolation being most common. We have also seen shutdown of industries, including repair yards. Just in the midst of the COVID-19, various additional so-called pandemic delay-related expenses incurred may affect the quantum of claim on the policy of insurance. Of course, the inconvenience caused by the COVID-19 more than this would be, causing difficulties in bringing in the crew, enhanced crew medical expenses by the COVID-19 restrictions, also the extra increased cost of maintaining the crew, for example, hotel accommodation where the vessel is uninhabitable due to the COVID-19 restrictions. And of course, the non-availability of harbor authority, personnel, and tug, crew, and pilots, etc. But these are what I just mentioned are not so relevant to the claim of general average and the particular average. So the best thing actually is to have a few examples. An example I particularly use is come across a vessel in Asia, sustained serious machinery damage, requiring repairs to enable her to continue trading. The shipowner, in conjunction with the underwriter surveyor representing insurers, they investigated and subsequently agreed at the method and nature of repairs of the main engine damage, and duly considered the feasibility of getting the job done by local contractors before the assured eventually enter into a repair contract with the engine makers, the original engine makers in Europe, wherein the standby rate of the team of the makers service engineer, their traveling and accommodation expenses during the quarantine period and the repair period are quoted. So the engineers, they travel from Europe to Asia to the repair port and were placed in the hotel for 14-day quarantine. After repairs, they travel back to home base in Europe and again, but similarly placed in local accommodation for quarantine. The shipowners pay for their accommodation and the contractor's invoice for surface engineer and standby rate during the respective quarantine periods. So actually, to do the repairs, you'll find that the additional, in addition to the normal repair costs, you will have to incur this the quarantine, isolation, accommodation, and also service charges, standby service charges. Would this be recoverable on top of the basic cost of repairs, the normal cost of repairs? Then we have to consider two issues probably. And first of all, the shipowners must always act as if he's an uninsured. If there's no insurance, what a reasonable shipowners would have done. In this case, when the decision was made to carry out permanent repairs of the main engine damage, it was never optimistically expected that the COVID-19 would disappear within a year or so. It's still ongoing, you see. It would be unreasonable to expect the shipowners to keep the vessel, which is not a toy, which is have to do business to make money. You can't expect the shipowners to keep his vessel out of commission, waiting for a period of many months for normality to return. So instead, the shipowners would, without hesitation, as an uninsured, be prepared to encounter the COVID-19 inconvenience and pay extra costs to return the vessel to full freight earning. Also, the method of repairs, there's no suggestion from other parties that it was imprudent to give the work to the engine makers. The other aspect issue we have to consider is whether there is the foreseeability and the knowability. We'll find that the traveling expenses, Europe, Asia, Europe, are essential. And the waiting charges, as agreed, are quite normal for repairs by maker's engineer working away from home. The quarantine isolation costs must be regarded as being well within the contemplation of both the shipowners and the insurers in the midst of the COVID-19. Being both foreseeable, also unavoidable. They are not losses proximately caused by the delay as excluded by the policy, by the Malaysian Act, but they are expenses necessarily incurred to commence repairs of the damage caused by peril insured gains, enabling same to be carried out. So to conclude, the additional pandemic delay-related expenses incurred in respect of the attendance of the maker's surface engineer as required for the repairs are properly categorized as what would have to be expended to put the ship right. Thus, the reasonable cost of thereof incurred would form a claim recoverable under the health policy. I have three other examples, which I actually extracted from the Association of Average Adjuster, the chairman's address last year about this COVID-19, the impact on the insurance claims. Example one, a vessel on a loaded passage from Asia to Europe entered the port of refuge after a serious casualty and begins grounding damage repairs expected to take 2 weeks in dry dock to replace her rudder. However, COVID-19 restrictions are introduced worldwide and the yard closes. As to the rudder manufacturers. So the vessel is now have to move to a lay-by berth where a standby tug is required by the port authorities. and the repairs are delayed for 2 months. The additional detention expenses, including the tug, are enormous, coming to $2 million. So in this additional expenses, actually unavoidable and reasonable insofar as the ashore is concerned. And in the circumstances, they are recoverable from the as a jet, because this is a voyage with cargo on board, and the vessel probably put into the port of refuge for the common safety, because she could not continue her voyage. Got put into the port of refuge to effect repairs necessary for the safe prosecution of the voyage. And then have this sort of circumstances. And the whole detention will be recoverable, would be allowable in general average according to the rule 10 and 11. And any additional expenses for the repairs will be allowable in the to a particular average. Example 2, a vessel suffers collision damage while some 50 miles from well-known repair port. It is understood that a complete lockdown at the port is soon going to be ordered by the government, so the vessel steams 500 miles to the nearest reasonable alternative ports, thus increasing the removal cost for repairs. She's scheduled to, to proceed to a port for repairs, remove to a port for repairing the damage caused by peril insured against collision. But then the port they scheduled to go there got this lockdown, and so she had to, instead of waiting for months, she had to find another port, and thus incurring additional removal expenses, steaming 500 miles. This sort of removal expenses will form reasonable cost of repairs. Example 3, a vessel is undergoing a major main engine alongside at a repair yard in Asia. COVID-19 restrictions are imposed and the repair yard is closed. The majority of the repairs have to be completed at the anchorage using overseas surface engineers at greatly increased cost. Some of the major spare parts required are not available from their usual source in China and have instead to be sourced from Europe at higher cost. So you will see, quite among high additional costs by reason caused by this COVID-19 restriction. And following what we discussed earlier, this sort of expenses would will appear to be forming part cost of repairs. The cost of repairs, the damage of the subject matter are issued, although it is increased by delay the COVID-19 restriction. Well, with this, it seems that we've been talking about the cases where the underwriters have to pay more, the insurers. So understandably, they will be trying to find some means to limit their liability, responsibility. There is an exclusion, which is communicable disease exclusion, drafted by the Joint Excess Loss Committee, the Lloyd's Market Association, and the International Underwriting Association. You see here, notwithstanding any provisions to the contrary in this reinsurance, it is hereby agreed that this insurance or reinsurance excludes absolutely all communicable disease loss. It's a blanket exclusion. safe, except. So so it's just a blanket exclusion. But then with the exclusion from exclusions, fairly complicated. And I think the clause, the structures, not easy to follow and quite confusing. And I don't think there's not much, not constructive to go through this course, this exclusion. As I understand, although this came out last year, so far I haven't seen shipbuilders accepting this exclusion in the policy. And what we would do is, something happen, a claim arise, and additional expenses incur, then we'll consider each case on its own merits and see whether that the additional cost will be either forming part of the reasonable cost of repairs in the case of particular average, or it's just reasonably allowable in terms of the rules, for the number rules of the yacht emirate rules. That's how we approach the matter. And until something specific come out from this exclusion. In the meantime, we just hope that the COVID-19 will disappear in not too distant future. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Mr. Raymond Wong. Very interesting presentation. So I already see some questions for you about your presentation. One is from Mr. C.H. Wong. Would the clause on communicable disease affect the insurance coverage in terms of the pandemic?
It would, but to what extent, I can't, as I said, the clause is at the exclusion. The wording, the structure is quite confusing and not that simply quite confusing and not so easy to follow or apply in practice. It will, otherwise they wouldn't have produced such sort of exclusion, the name exclusion. But as I said, it's a blanket exclusion with exclusion from exclusion. The short answer is yes.
Thank you. And
but not much, I think.
I see. There's also another question, also from Mr. C.H. Wong. Would all the extra costs of operating ships be covered by the insurers, or would there be a redrafting of laws and regulations in light of the pandemic?
I don't quite follow. What? Can you repeat the question?
Okay, so it's actually on the chat box anyway, but let me repeat. Would all the extra costs of operating ships be covered by the insurers, or would there be a redrafting of laws and regulations in the light of the pandemic, which is essentially force majeure, as men propose, God disposes?
I'm afraid the operation costs increased by the pandemic. In principle, no, they are not covered by any policies. But each case, as I said, each case on its own merit. I did mention that the crew issue, there are quite a number of expenses incurred or inconvenience caused by the pandemic. But for the whole machinery, not really. And for the P&I, P&I, I think Mr. Wong, Sid Wong, he knows very well that even though the cover have no specific cover, I mean, the members, the shipbuilders can submit a claim for the consideration of the board of the P&I club under the omnibus rule.
I see. Thank you very much. So may I ask, are there any further questions from the audience? Okay, so I don't see any. So, so once again, thank you very much, Mr. Raymond Wong. And
thank you all.
Concludes this session and also day one of the conference. Before I end, I would like to make an announcement because at first we should have Professor Yingen to do the final presentation, but as you can see, Professor Ge has another meeting at 6:30 p.m. So he has to leave. And so he talked to me, and we have already scheduled that Professor Ge's presentation will take place tomorrow as the last presentation of day 2. So what I will do is I will also ask my secretary to update the conference program, and I will upload it on the conference website. And so all of you, if you are joining us tomorrow, you can please go to download the updated conference program, and you will see Professor Ge's latest presentation date and time. Okay. So okay. So in this case, then. Once again, thank you very much. Thank you all the speakers and also all the audience in joining this conference. That's the end for day 1 for the conference. And again, also thanks for staying that long for 3 hours with us, and hope that you enjoy all the presentations and all the discussions. And hopefully we'll also see you again tomorrow and also the day after. So well, I will say goodbye and good evening and good morning and good afternoon, depending on your time zone. Thank you very much. It's okay.
Thank you.
See you all then.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.